Thank you for having me on the show, and please excuse the background noise. I'm at the airport going to another school.
No worries.
But yeah, so in 1998, I was gang raped by 4 football players, and I went to the police. I got a rape kit done. I did everything that I was supposed to do as the victim of a crime to pursue justice. But what I encountered was horrible. A lot of backlash. My community turned on me, called me a liar. You know, why was I trying to ruin these young men's lives? Death threats. People, friends, family, people turned on me. I pretty much lost everything. I was suicidal. It was a really hard time. And the DA told me I didn't have a good case. The DA said it was a he said, she said case, and I probably wouldn't win. So I dropped the charges based on that information. Coach Mike Riley was the coach back then. He gave the players a 1-game suspension because he said that they made these are good guys who made a bad choice, is what he said in the paper. I reported to the school. They said they would handle it, and then I just tried to move on with my life. But for 16 years, I struggled, as most survivors do. PTSD, depression, borderline eating disorder, a lot of suicidal ideation. And in 2014, I just decided I wanted something different in my life. I was literally just tired of waking up every day wanting to die. And so through a series of events, I ended up meeting a reporter, and I shared my story, and I put my name and my face on it. And then from there, I ended up meeting Coach Riley and confronting him about what he said in summer 2016. And that story went viral in the media, and then schools just started calling me. And for 2 years, I've just been traveling the country now full time, working with different programs and talking about these issues and helping people understand what survivors go through, attempting to humanize the issue, trying to help them understand the dynamics of sexual assault and domestic violence, because a lot of people don't understand, and it's hard for us to wrap our brains around it. So I've just dedicated my life also to making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else.
You know, obviously, the story we're dealing with here and what Ohio State is looking into. Did Urban Meyer handle domestic violence allegations against Zach Smith properly? Should Zach Smith have been on the staff? Was anyone looking out for Courtney Smith? In cases like this, when you hear defense, what bothers you? Are there myths about domestic violence that you hear that jump out at you? And what are those myths?
Well, so the thing that bothers me most is the victim blaming. We're so quick to put all of the blame and the responsibility and the onus on the victim. Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she report? Why didn't she do this? Why didn't she do that? And none of it is on the perpetrator. Why didn't he leave? Why did he do this? The responsibility is always on the victim. And we see that in case after case after case after case. And we're seeing it now with Courtney Smith, too, right? Why is she bringing Urban into it? Why didn't she leave? Why did, all this stuff. And that is the thing that bothers me the most, is the victim blaming. Because survivors are victims of crime. And there's no other crime aside from sexual assault and domestic violence that we blame the victim. We don't say to somebody that had their house robbed, well, what did you do to deserve that? Did you have your windows open? Were the curtains open? Were you showing off your fancy stuff? If they were mugged on the street, well, were you wearing a nice suit? Do you look like you have money? Were you asking for it? We don't say any of these things to victims of other crimes, but we say it to domestic violence victims and rape survivors.
So here's what I want to be honest with you, and Stan and I have been struggling with this story from the day that it came out, and every day we talk about this. Now, Courtney Smith has come forward, and the vast majority of victims of domestic abuse are telling the truth. And in this case, we've seen texts and we've seen photos that paint a picture, so we should be listening to her. On the other hand, there are cases where people have been wrongly accused, and that's kind of what we're falling into in this case here. So we're struggling with this. How should we be handling this to be fair as this investigation continues and unfolds? How, Brenda, should we, Stan and me, and all of Columbus, for that matter, be handling this?
So, number one, you don't have to, it's possible to believe survivors and understand that false reports are not what we think they are. They are rare compared to true reports coming out, right?
Right.
We can believe survivors and allow due process to be carried out. You can do both of those. You don't have to automatically decide she must be lying, the victim must be lying. And that is the thing that everybody kind of jumps to immediately. She's lying, he's lying, because anybody can be a victim of these crimes. But the jump to assume that this person is lying until we are proven otherwise is wrong. support survivors. I just don't understand. And again, we don't do this with any other crime. We don't assume that all people who have been robbed are lying and make them prove that they're not. You can do both. So I think that we need to support Courtney Smith, but you can also support due process being carried out, right? The investigation happening. But you don't have to turn on her.
Right.
You don't have to turn on her and call her a liar and do all this harm to domestic violence survivors everywhere, right? Because when we see these things, how does this make it any easier for a victim to come forward? If they know if I come forward against someone in the athletic program, a man of power, position, money, this is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to be attacked. I'm going to be dragged. This does not help victims come forward. And that's what people say, right? Well, if you were hurt, then come forward, report. Okay, but if I come forward and I report, am I going to get dragged in the media? Am I going to get crucified the way that Courtney is?
Yep. I'm telling you, Brenda, we're struggling dealing with this because we're trying to be fair, but those are excellent words of advice for all of us. And I know that you saw what happened this week in Columbus, the Urban Meyer rally. And to be fair, it wasn't well attended, but it happened, and there were signs of support for Coach Meyer. Stan and I said before it happened, this is a bad look. It was even more uncomfortable afterward. What was your reaction to it?
It was unnecessary, and I feel like it was in absolutely poor taste. It was not necessary. They could have been having a rally for domestic violence survivors. Again, you can, if you want to support Urban Meyer, fine, but you don't need to get a sign and go out there and make a stand, kind of like you're for Urban Meyer and against every domestic violence survivor there is. I mean, there was even like Me Too signs, and it was a total dig at survivors, and it was kind of like this thing of like survivors lie, and it just was it was sad. I hated it. I thought it was awful. If you want to support Urban Meyer and wait for the investigation to pan out, then fine, but you also don't need to be online talking about all victims lie and Courtney Smith lies and all of these things. There's a way to handle this with more tact and class. And even, the stuff with coming out now with the moms saying that Courtney is wrong, this is not an unusual dynamic. She may be victim blaming her own daughter, and it's not unusual for this to happen. So we have to consider these dynamics also.
Visiting with Brenda Tracy, who travels the country speaking to college and high school teams and athletes about the treatment of women and sexual assault and domestic abuse. You were recently at Ohio State, as I said, and I can tell you the day after you talked, Caleb Wesson, one of Ohio State's basketball players, had a media session and talked openly with all of us about how powerful your presentation was, and that as a team, a day later, they were still talking about it. When you talk to athletes, coaches, what is the message you want them to get?
So what I really try to do is I try to do two things. Number one is I try to humanize survivors. So I tell my story in very graphic detail, and I try to get them to understand, like, I'm a person, and this happened to me. And then the other thing is I try to inspire them to get engaged. I think that men and women in this country need to get engaged and start working on this issue together. For too long, we've decided this is a women's issue, and women are in charge of fixing it. But the thing is I believe if women could stop sexual assault, domestic violence, if women could stop violence against women, we would have already done it. It would not be an issue. I would not exist as a rape survivor. Men are the missing component. In cases of sexual assault, probably 98% of all sexual violence is carried out by men. The perpetrators are men. So we need men to step in as the solution. It's the good guys that don't commit these crimes that I ask to have conversations with other men. If you hear somebody saying something sexist, call them out about it. Care about people more than just your own mother and your sister. Care about that other man's mother and sister. Every woman belongs to someone. So I talk to them about all these things. I ask them to get engaged. I ask them to set the expectation for themselves and others and stand up.
Last thing before I let you go, I told you Caleb Wesson and how obviously moved he was. Is there any reaction that you've gotten from a player, a coach, a team, or whatever that stuck out to you? Like the best reaction you've gotten from a talk?
What happens a lot, very frequently, is I have young men call home and talk to their moms after my talk. And I've literally had young men come to me and say, I called my mom and she disclosed to me that she was a rape survivor. And not only that, but I have to tell you that men are survivors too. And I have a lot of young men come up to me, and sometimes I'm the very first person they've ever told that they've been sexually assaulted or molested as a young man or a child. And that is heartbreaking to me, that they feel that they can't say anything because they're men, right? This doesn't happen to men like the Ohio State wrestlers, right?
Mm-hmm.
How could that happen to them? How could they allow that to happen? There's such a stigma. And I'm a person who comes into these rooms. They've listened to me for an hour, and now they've come and they told me the worst moment of their life. That's heartbreaking to me. And we have to start thinking about this, that anyone can be a victim, anyone can be a survivor. The stats are incredibly horrible, and we have to do better as a society.
Well, Brenda, we commend you on what you're doing. You have a powerful message. You're obviously having an impact on those that hear it. We appreciate you joining us and giving us your perspective.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really do appreciate it.